his FY24 budget. So,
good afternoon, Commissioners. Nick Snyder for the record. I'm not sure where you want me to start. I haven't been party to the earlier format, so how would you like to proceed?
everybody's done something a little bit different, so you proceed as you like.
Very good. Well, what's in front of you, and I'll preface it with I've had an opportunity to meet with each of you and Director Falcon to discuss our budget. So the sheet before you leaves out a little bit of the detail that I went over with you. It's sort of a high-level snapshot of the changes. And starting in noxious weeds, if you want to start there at the top of the page, you'll see immediately that we have a decrease. Seasonal employees, we are going to eliminate those two positions. They've been difficult to fill historically, and quite frankly, by the time we get them trained, much like Marine deputies, then they're done. So we're going to eliminate that position. We're still able to cover the same amount of work. We're just going to do it a little bit differently. So that's a significant reduction there. And then I'd like to draw your attention to the green item under B budget, 8199, other professional services. Since we met, Commissioners, I had to put that number in at $4,670, which is predicated on the cost that the contractor for spraying our noxious weeds on county properties provided. So this information has been added since I met with you. So this is an increase of $4,670, which probably comes to no surprise to you, Commissioners, that the contractors are starting to raise prices in this weird world we're living in. And that is used to, again, control noxious weeds on county property that is part of Idaho code. It is required. So we do these treatments on solid waste, airport, parks and waterways properties, and other county properties. So that is the one change that is before you in noxious weeds. The overall reduction, though, as you can tell when you look at our B budget versus A budget, it's still a net gain there.
Okay.
You can see that we do have one capital item in noxious weeds to the tune of $15,434 necessary to buy a replacement trailer for noxious weeds that hauls the UTV around that does the spray work. I hate to say it's a one-time purchase, but they last a long time, 15 to 20 years the way we take care of them. But it is necessary. Some of our trailers are underrated and getting tired, so we'll be retiring some trailers if the board funds this once we acquire it. Moving on to snow groomer, if you don't have any questions there, you can see it's a fairly straightforward budget. We do have some significant decreases, which you can see there. One of those is you'll see under the red 8519 road maintenance of $1,200. We no longer take care of Fernand Hill, so that's the cost that we would typically appropriate to sanding. So that's gone. Jumping down to parks, that's a much larger spectrum there. Again, I met with each one of you individually to discuss our signs, and that's in your first line, 7910 in the green there of 1250, and you'll see that sort of repeat itself throughout the budget. You might not have a detail, I apologize, actually. The overall, Commissioners, is tied to signs, placarding vehicles. You might remember that we had a discussion about some format changes for some of our staff coming up. So there'll be some placarding of vehicles. We had ordinance changes that are going to need to be memorialized on signs. So much of what you're seeing in the B budget increase before you in parks is tied to those changes. And some of those are one-time changes for equipment for our staff tied to their potential job duty changes. Another one that has changed since I met with the board is memorialized under other utilities in our budget, and that essentially is pumping restroom vault toilets. We're working on getting a contract, a 5-year renewable contract together with a provider. Commissioners, it's getting very difficult to find companies to pump our restroom holding tanks. It's expensive, it's not pleasurable work, so you can imagine recruitment for those positions. So we are seeing an increase. We've memorialized it there. It's not terrible, it's $2,000, but we are seeing an increase. So the overall B budget increase you'll see there is predicated on just those changes. Again, some signage, some equipment for staff forthcoming, and then we do have one that I'd like to discuss. Commissioner Duncan and I are meeting tomorrow with a local highway district. We're hoping that we're able to use some of those funds that may or may not change to increase our 8501 is what it's called in our B budget. It's basically our ability to take care of day-to-day maintenance and repair projects in parks. That was reduced when we did an agreement with a highway district. You might recall some of that discussion. And so we're hoping that that will, even though we have an increase there between that and then my one capital request, which is to get a drinking water system out at State Line, that hopefully that will be budget neutral, commissioners. If you recall our conversation about maybe a potential change in those payments to a district. So even though it is memorialized as an increase, we're hoping that ends up to be a wash. But we'll know more this week when we meet with the district. And I'm happy to touch base with the board and Brandy, Director Falcon, after that meeting. So again, our capital is pretty minimal, and that is, again, just $15,000 for a much-needed drinking fountain water system out at State Line Park. Moving down to boat launch, we have an increase there. I want to remind the commissioners, if you didn't remember from a conversation, our individual meetings, we talked about a lot in a short amount of time, and I can appreciate that. Boat launch user fees are generated, of course, by the boating public, and we have been very, very conservative about putting those dollars into our day-to-day work operation because we had to stack match money to pay for the replacement workboat. That's coming to fruition. We should have our workboat. So moving forward, we need to start integrating those boat launch fees into our daily operation and grant match, because that's the direct benefit to the boater. So I have an increase of $10,000 in 8501, which is in our budget. It speaks to other minor repairs and renovations. It's our, again, fixing pilings and docks that benefit the boater directly. So as an example, commissioners, historically we only, out of $170,000 to $190,000 average annual revenue, we've only been using about $45,000 to $50,000 a year in order to stack to pay for the boat. We're going to have that done, so it's time to start integrating that money back in to operations moving forward. Again, direct benefit to the boater who's generating the income. I do have a note here about capital, just as a discussion point. You'll see that we believe that our grant that we applied for in January with the Idaho State Parks will be successful. We don't have official word, but we have some confidence that it will fund. That's going to cause us to expend some grant match as required. It's in fund balance. It's not part of our budget. It used to be, right? You would put grant match into budget. It's not, but at least I want the board to be aware that that's forthcoming and that could be paid out of our next fiscal year budget from fund balance. And I only put it there as a note for discussion that we're all aware that it's not gonna, the board doesn't approve it, but you need to know about it. So I just want to make sure that you're aware that that will be coming forward. And then finally, the vessel account, which is generated by vessel registration, boat registration dollars, which is shared with the Kootenai County Sheriff Marine Division. It sort of has the same theme. We have expenditures there in B budget increase to cover the cost of those ordinance change signs and placarding on our vehicles, and the increase in portable restrooms. So we deploy porta potties at county facilities that don't have large parking areas and they're not really developed. An example is Greens Ferry boat launch on the Spokane River. We put a porta potty there in some of the locations. The contractor has notified us that that will also increase. So restrooms are expensive, and that's there's an increase of about $1,100. But other than parks and noxious weeds, commissioners, all these funds are non-general fund dollars. So these increases that we're asking in most budgets are being paid for by the user. So I'd just like to let the board be aware of that. And running some rough numbers, and I'm not the accountant, we'll let Brandy just give you the hard numbers. We're about a 30% increase overall on B B budget, but most of that, again, is kind of that one-time stuff that we talked about, and these are, some of it is non-general fund. But we also have approximately a 19% decrease in A. Now, and I want to be careful when I say that, in that A budget, I don't see all the inner workings of labor and industries, costs and per se and those things, but just looking, generally speaking, we've got about a 19% decrease in our A budget. Certainly if the commissioners give raises, that'll be reduced by some, but that's not really a world that I play in. That's more the auditor's office that creates those numbers. So that's basically what I have. That's the snapshot. We don't have any big asks in terms of capital or other increases. Most of it is just what it's going to take to do business, predicated on ordinance changes and potential staff changes, as we've discussed. And that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, questions?
That was a lot.
It is
a lot in a very short period of time.
I understand. Any questions about these increases?
No.
Just that if you take out general fund versus the non-general fund, I mean, that's not that big of an increase then.
No, it's in terms of overall dollars.
Yeah.
You know, if you start at the top, noxious weeds, you know, it's $15,000 capital.
Right.
And we have about 40,000 thereabouts projected in fund balance. So it's a fairly small amount. And you look again at snow groomer, it's actually an overall decrease. You look at parks, it's a $15,000 capital project. The gentleman sitting to my 6 is going to talk about, you know, that's probably my overall budget is his fuel bill. So when you start talking about these increases, it sounds like a lot, but at the end of the day, Commissioner, it is correct. They're fairly nominal, particularly our capital. We've got a $15,000 trailer and a $15,000 drinking fountain this year. We have really worked hard to save and build fund balance to pay a couple big ticket items. You might remember Harrison Breakwater. That was a multi-year project at $1.5 million. We sort of got these big things out of the way. We're trying to really just take care of the basics, and we'll bring forward a strategic plan to the board to take a look at for next year moving forward. We're going to need to start picking off big projects again. But again, most of this money is user fees, and we leverage it well for grants. That's what I have.
Questions?
Nope.
Anything else? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, solid waste.
Thank you.
All right.
Are you ready?
Yep.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thanks for having us. John Phillips for the record. The Solid Waste Department is here today to present to you our fiscal year 2024 proposed budget. The Department Business Finance Manager, Angela Bergeson, has put most of this information together with input from our site managers as well as our operation manager and myself. Angela will be presenting the bulk of today's information and will answer most of your questions. However, any questions specifically related to heavy equipment purchases or vehicle purchases should be directed to Doug Goodwin, our operations manager, or myself. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll turn this presentation over to Angela at this time.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Well, my laptop isn't quite going as planned, so we will do this all on hard copy, so I don't really have things to show everybody, but everything that I was going to show I have printouts of. Planning for FY24 had some fun challenges. Of course, we have our continuing costs going up. staff challenges, as well as some very big capital projects coming up, which is all things that were planned for by solid waste, and is why we carry the funds that we do to cover these things, because they've been expected for a very long time and were well planned. So I gave copies. You have a copy of the budget snapshot, and it just outlines the actual of FY22, what it ended at, what our budget for FY23 is, and what our plan is for 24. And I'll just kind of bounce back and forth from the budget snapshot page as far as going through the A, B, and C budget, and then looking at the supporting things that go with it. And we can stop at each one to answer any questions.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll go back and forth. First one, revenue. It is a very conservative estimate of what I see our revenue being. It will likely be more than what I put on here, but I like to plan it a little short just in case some things don't go as we think. You know, if our gas ends up being lower, so we don't get as much on recycling or things like that. There are a lot of things that can change, so it's hard to tell and to make that a hard and fast number. So I was very conservative with our revenue. Personnel, there is of course not a lot of input that we do with personnel as far as what everybody's wages are. We do have a request though, and mainly because of the staffing shortages. So from the snapshot, you see our request as being higher by $53,600. The request is $190,500. And that, so on the next page where it says personnel A budget, what it is for our overtime, to increase the overtime. If you have seen, our overtime usage is very high, and that's because we still have to maintain our operations even though we have been down between 5 and 9 positions for quite some time. So on this one, we have the A budget, and then as well as the next page, our request. And it is increasing those overtime budget lines to be more reflective of what we're currently using versus us just blowing the budget because we have to maintain our operation. So it's more in keeping to what we're actually doing. And then also our seasonal staff went up, and that's because of the wonderful raise that you guys let us do for our seasonal, going from $15 to $17. It's the same amount of hours and amount of need of seasonals. It just increased by that amount. So that's it on A budget. Any questions on that?
Questions?
Nope.
Okay.
Okay. And of course, being solid waste being an enterprise fund, these are all the funds that I talk about using. It is all from our balance, not from the general. So B budget was actually pretty flat. I tried to get it as flat as I could, even with the changes in fuel and our hauling contract, which are always a challenge. So as far as the change between, so if you look at the budget snapshot, the B budget, the increase is $165,939, which is under 2% in our B budget of an increase. So very minimal with, of course, the rising inflation, which we know is a lot higher than 2%. So we were able to minimize, cut back in areas where we weren't using the funds and make sure that we had it to cover all the things that we needed, like hauling and fuel. So on B budget, it just goes through that on where it shows the base budget. I have our costs, our admin, Ramsey, Prairie, Rural, and Fighting Creek costs, the total, and then also lists the total of our expenditures minus hauling and fuel. So it's minimal. If you don't count our hauling and fuel costs, it's very little our increase. And a lot of that has to do with some of the contracts we negotiated, like our janitorial and things like that. Nothing too out of line. The next page, though, shows our full FY24 report, and you can see the different budget lines and the percentage of increase or decrease on the right. So feel free to take a look through that. Let me know if there's anything that you see out of line or have questions on for our B budget. I'm trying to see on here. A lot of it we have no control over, like newspapers and magazines. That's just the cost of having those items for our employees and to look at. That was at 36%. A lot of it is just our standard, just the standard operating things. But some of it we were able to cut down versus FY23, like administrative services. And that's our contract with the city for doing the City of Coeur d'Alene billing with us. That's that contract. But any questions on B budget?
It's a lot.
It is, so feel free to take a look through.
Bill, any questions?
When you say,
We subscribe to the Coeur d'Alene Press, and we have copies of that paper at both the landfill, Prairie, and Ramsey, and it's just budgeted at what they charge us.
oh, okay.
That's the only thing in that line. It's minimal.
I think it's the 4 zeros after the decimal point that threw me off a little bit.
Oh, yes, sorry.
It looked like a comma from just far enough away.
No, much smaller, much smaller.
Okay. That makes more sense.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. Any other questions on B?
Nope.
Okay.
Sound like it.
No, thank
Now
you.
on to the fun one, our capital projects. And this is the one I want to be able to explain quite a bit, and which is why Doug is here too, because this is a big ask. There are a lot of big projects coming up for FY24, and this is why we plan what we do with our fees and our with our budget, because we knew that these costs were coming up. And with the landfill reaching capacity in our E3 cell, we have to start getting ready, or sorry, E2, we have to start getting ready by constructing E3. And that's what is in here. So the big one, we have the total cost of our capital line for FY24, the request is $14,424,000. And on the next page, it is all broken down as far as what that is for. That is, each year we do 2 new transfer trailers, 2 for Ramsey, 2 for Prairie, and that's been an ongoing cost for quite some time now. And that's just because of how much we use those trailers and how often we have to keep our fleet up. Front load garbage truck is in there, and that is for the drop-off area at Ramsey that we are planning, so that we can change our traffic flow a little bit, have the people dispose of the smaller loads of garbage in a separate area. It'll be kind of like a rural site at Ramsey. So we'll need a truck to be able to empty those cans and get that over to the floor. So that's what that is for. Ramsey facility improvements, that is another, a scale deck for, Doug, was that Scale House 3?
Scale House 3.
Yes. Scale House 3, as well as other site improvements. Ramsey drop-off area, there's the construction and the engineering of that. And then the oil tanker trailer. This one is a good one. So Ramsey has a oil tanker trailer. Prairie is wanting one as well. And what this does, it's a small trailer. But, so the used oil that's brought to us at hazmat, we can put it into that trailer and haul it out to the landfill and use it in the waste oil heaters. So another way to use that material instead of just disposing of it. Waste handler loader, that is another one. It's on our equipment replacement plan. We have a loader out at Prairie that has reached its expectancy for us, for our uses. Prairie facility improvements, that is a cost that we always put in, again, in case things come up that they need, like if they need to repair their HVAC or things that may come up in that time. And of course, if we don't use it, then sometimes it gets rolled over into a bigger project for the following year, or, you know, we just leave it for the fund. The next one, appraisal and purchase of a rural site. So we just want to set aside or kind of earmark $100,000 rather. So if we do find land that we see that could be used as a rural site to consolidate some of the others where we don't own the land, we want to be able to have that there so that we can pursue it and get an appraisal for it and potentially increase our rural sites. Leachate treatment project, that is $2 million. And that, as we know, that is one that it came up, it was not in our long-range plan, so we had to adjust for our uses. Some of the, where we were bringing the water with the leachate before, we can't any longer without doing something different with it and being able to treat it first. So that is so that we can get that off the ground. And we've been, working with all sorts of, that one company, where is it from again?
Dynatech out of New Jersey right now is doing the preliminary bench scale test, but then we got a quote to estimate what permanent equipment may cost, but it's still up in the air. So $2 million is a figure for what that equipment may cost.
Okay, how long have our engineers been working on that?
So our engineers, I've involved them very little up until this point. They're aware of what's going on, but once the bench scale pilot test is complete and Dynatech determines, yes, we think we can treat your leachate, at that point I'll get the engineers really involved because they'll bring in a larger scale testing at the landfill for a couple of months this summer. And so that'd be something I'd be bringing to the board.
All right. Any questions on their capital projects?
Did these happen within 12 months, or do you expect them to take years to
So the bulk of all of this would happen definitely within that time frame. The last item, the $9.8 million for landfill expansion, E3 construction, it is likely that project would finish outside of the fiscal year. However, we typically carry the money over it. Typically, those construction projects end in December, but that's final completion. So substantial would be sometime around that end of October timeframe.
Okay.
But the one item I will point out, the Ramsey drop-off area engineering, we've moved that up, and so I'll be bringing that to today's business meeting. If that was improved, that could come off the list if that's approved today.
Okay, and just the engineering, not the drop-off area?
Right, only the engineering.
Well, this is an addition. Because it didn't quite, because what we budgeted for FY23 covers a majority of the engineering, but we needed part of it for FY24.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe a mistake.
Sorry. So it wouldn't come off. This was for the additional that we needed, but it would end up occurring in FY24 for oversight of the construction.
Gotcha.
I see.
Okay, any other questions on capital?
A lot of projects coming up.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
And, one more question, if we can. So is it okay to submit the budget as presented? Okay, thank you.
So our last one is scheduled for 3 o'clock, so we have a little less than 20 minutes before our business meeting. So I'll go ahead and put us, huh? Yes? Oh, hopefully 2:30. Okay, great. All right, well, we'll recess this until after the business meeting, and the business meeting, I don't think should be more than 30 minutes, 20 minutes. It's pretty short this time, so. All right, thank you all.